Like many of you, Hockey Night in Canada was a staple in my house growing up in Montreal. Saturday night at 8 p.m. would guarantee that the family was gathered around the TV in the living room to listen to the scintillating play-by-play of Danny Gallivan, the dulcet tones of Dick Irvin and Ward Cornell. We watched the games, the speed, the fights, and in those days, the sheer talents of the likes of Jean Beliveau, Bobby Orr, and Phil Esposito. In the early 80s, CBC brought on Don Cherry, first as an analyst and later as anchor of Coach's Corner, first with Dave Hodge and then with Ron MacLean. The show lasted some 34 years and was a popular spot on the national broadcast, partly because Cherry would take controversial positions that offended some people and pleased others. But throughout those years, Cherry didn't care. He said what he said, and he believed what he believed. Last month he was fired by CTV Sportsnet, who now have the rights for the NHL broadcast, for comments he made on the Saturday just prior to Remembrance Day. Cherry has long been a supporter of the military and the police. His paternal grandfather, Jack, was a member of the original Northwest Mounted Police. On that fateful Hockey Night in Canada broadcast, Cherry offended some snowflakes by saying that a lot of folks in Mississauga, where he lives, and in downtown Toronto weren't wearing poppies in remembrance of our military members who sacrificed their lives in the service of this country. Cherry said, quote, "You people come here, you love our way of life, you love our milk and honey, at least pay a couple of bucks for a poppy. These guys paid for your way of life that you enjoy in Canada," unquote. And with that, he was fired the next day. The following week, MacLean threw Cherry under the bus and blamed himself for not stopping Cherry, seeing the way the monologue was going. He also blamed his white privilege. The following week, MacLean hosted a panel discussing the, quote, racism, unquote, prevalent in the NHL. He had a female on the panel, Sarah Nurse, and 3 players of color, including Anson Carter, in what can only be described as 10 minutes and 21 seconds of cringe-inducing television.
So I'll tell you a little story from my point of view that will probably lead you first and then Kwame. When we did an interview a year ago, Kwame and I, after Devontae Smith Pelly had to deal with racial agitation, and it was a nice conversation. But I said to Kwame, you know, I don't see you as black. I don't see Tara as a woman. And then I realized there's your white male privilege. You know what, Ron? You don't have to see that because you don't need to see that. And you told me, Kwame, an amazing story about when the kids throw back to Hockey Night in Canada. As a general rule, they're often all white. And if they're not all white, the whites often have the speaking part. And it's the same with our Rogers Hometown Hockey. We're so proud of being inclusive, but how many times do we get people of color to pick the 3 stars? And it was just a real eye-opener that I don't recognize the structural racism or sexism that's going on.
This self-flagellation of Canada about racism in hockey is pure nonsense. We are a northern country. The demographic of Canada is primarily white. But I can say, as someone who played hockey for more than 50 years, I have played with players of all ethnic backgrounds, and no one was treated any different than any other player. Why is hockey suddenly under this racism microscope? What about the NBA? About 75% of the players in the NBA are black, and blacks make up only about 13% of the population of the United States. Is the NBA racist too? Because that would essentially be the same argument. The reality is that we, as a northern country with cold winters, kids in Canada gravitate towards hockey. When I was growing up, I spent hours every day in the winter on outdoor rinks. It's what we did. In the U.S., kids growing up spend hours on basketball courts. It's what they do, especially in the inner cities. It is not racist to say that is reality and explains the makeup of the NBA. Equally, it explains the makeup of the NHL. We're not a racist country, and hockey is not a racist sport. The firing of Cherry is little more than an exercise by the oh-so-politically correct morons who are afraid of the hand-wringers who continually look for ways to get offended. For the record, there is nothing in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that said anyone has the right to not be offended. For True North, I'm Leo Knight.